Hello, my name is Ken Blackman. Robin asked me today if I'd be interested in doing a video about how I heard about and came to Meher Baba. And so reluctantly I said yes, because I always say yes because it has to do with Baba, and I promised him that I would always say yes to things that have to do with him. I can't swear that I always do that, but I try to. It's hard to know where to start. I first heard of Meher Baba back in 1973. I was in New York at the time. I was engaged with a school called Eureka. It was a program for personal growth and enlightenment, and it was quite an important and powerful part of my life at that time. I was attending classes there in New York, and I met somebody in some of those workshops and classes by the name of Michael, who mentioned to me something about Meher Baba. And I was interested because at that time I had been searching for quite a long time for various different avenues that might help me with some of my internal questions and my internal struggles. Grew up in a family that had quite a bit of dysfunction, alcoholism, conflict, divorce, and it left me struggling to find meaning in my life, and also left me with certain, I would say, psychological and emotional kind of traumas. So one of the avenues I was pursuing after especially getting my degree in psychology was to look into spiritual dimensions to see if there would be answers for me there. And I traveled around quite a bit to different practices with different teachers, different types of programs, studied meditation and yoga, Tibetan Buddhism, various different Hindu teachers in New York City, where I lived close in New Jersey. So when I first heard of Meher Baba, I think the first book I read was Listen, Humanity, which really had a pretty profound effect on me. And I was immediately drawn to what I experienced with Baba as being words that captured me on a very deep level in terms of coming from a source that I had never experienced before. The source was profoundly astounding to me, that it seemed to have the quality of knowing, not philosophizing or intellectualizing, but knowing. And knowing about things that I thought were very important that weren't really addressed in many of the other schools I studied, like very serious questions about marriage and sex and death and humanity, and things that I found very, very compelling. So that was when I first heard of Meher Baba. Now, I think I ended up on the slow boat. A lot of people hear about Meher Baba, and just like that, they're hooked. I was certainly attracted to him, but because I was doing so many different practices and they all had meaning for me, I continued in those directions to practice a lot of different spiritual types of processes and schools, and kept Baba with me and kept reading Meher Baba's works and his writings and about his life. And at some point when I was involved with Eureka School, I was doing trainings. After having been through some of the trainings, I became a trainer, and I was doing that. And I decided to travel to Myrtle Beach. And to make the journey, I wanted to have a vehicle. I didn't have a vehicle, so I put out to the universe that I needed a vehicle. I didn't have much money. And I couldn't find one. I just couldn't find one. And eventually I walked out of my front door where I was living, and there in front was this beautiful blue Dodge 1967 long extended van. And it was like, oh, it just drew me. It was perfect. And somebody was there who was part of the Eureka group, and they said, oh, I found somebody who's selling this van for like $600, which is about what I had, but it was actually a little less. So I said, I'll take it. And I took it, I fixed it up, I made it into a camper. And my intention was to travel to California in it, but to go to the beach at first, and also to go to the Edgar Cayce Center, because Edgar Cayce was the first person that I had ever encountered who spoke to me about things like reincarnation and the connection between things we're experiencing now and the source of those things, not just in our early life and childhood and psychology, but in maybe our past lives, so that there was a connection that helped me to understand a little bit more about some of the dynamics for me, that things that might be affecting me. Anyway, it broadened my thinking about it, and so I was really drawn to Edgar Cayce. I eventually ended up working in an Edgar Cayce clinic in Arizona. It was the only holistic clinic at the time. That was early on. So I fixed the van up as a camper, and I made my way down to Myrtle Beach. At the time, I think I had a person with me who was my second wife and somebody else, and we ended up coming to the center. And I'll back up from there for just a moment, because we did arrive at the center, and I had a very profound experience there, and I'll hold off on sharing that one for a moment. I want to go back, because I was just remembering last night, I think what you heard me sharing was a time that I had in Boston. And I want to share that because it's a bit of a prelude and it's a build-up to this whole story for me. I think the story began when I was 7 years old and was like lost in my own head. And I sat outside our house one day and looked up at the sky and the stars at night and said, what's going on? Why am I here? What's happening? I don't know what prompted that, but it was a pretty profound experience. And then I went on with being a kid. It wasn't always a happy childhood, but I liked to play. I liked to build forts and things. So that did lead me through all these trainings and then to the Eureka program. And in the Eureka program, one of the trainings that they offered and I did was a 40-day training. And that was 40 days and nights, I guess, based upon the whole principle that exists in esoteric, spiritual, mystical circles, that if you do 40 days and 40 nights, there's a good chance that you might get some benefit. So this training was set up for 40 days and 40 nights. And it was a good training. It helped me a lot in many ways. But at the end of the training, at the end of the 40 days, they had sort of, maybe not directly, but they had given us the impression that at the end of those 40 days, we might be in a pretty good enlightened place. And I was thinking, well, that's good, because I'd like to be in an enlightened place. That would be better where I've been for a while. During those 40 days, we would be involved in different types of practices all day long into the evening, and then we would go home, and in the evening we would have our altar set up with different things on it, and the altar was for us to be practicing way into midnight, doing different types of meditations, which was interesting. I liked meditating. I liked the formal rituals of practices, and this also involved a lot of work with individuals and groups, so it was a very profoundly beneficial program. At the end of the 40 days, having come to a place where I was not sure that I had gained enough to really help me to feel as though I was comfortably in a much better place, I went back to my abode, where I stayed with a bunch of people in one particular house. And someone said I better go up to my room. And he sounded kind of worried, so I did go up to my room. And when I got there, the altar that I had set up had a lot of things on it. And I had also put in a piece of white linen to the floor, across the altar, and up to the ceiling. So it was a beautiful altar. And on that altar were beads and yantras and mantras and all these other paraphernalia we were using, bowls and a lot of different items that were part of the practice. And what I saw was that the altar had burnt down somehow. The linen was all burnt. All the items that were on the altar were singed and burnt, except for something I had put there when I first got to Boston. I'd picked up at a Mayor Baba store, and it was a picture of Baba saying, "Don't worry, be happy." And that was sitting in the middle of the altar, and it was untouched. And I took that as a sign. I couldn't not. I tend to be a little scientific in my, intellectual in my processes. I like to make sure things make sense. And this didn't make sense. Like, okay. I felt moved by that, and part of that was, all right, I did my 40 days, and at the end of it, what was left was Baba. He was undisturbed, and he was simply saying, "Don't worry, be happy." And to me, that's not a simple saying, but it's a powerful saying. Don't worry, be happy means there's something that would help me to understand, why wouldn't I worry? There's something deeper that he was saying to me. And in that moment of having gone from a position, I think, of feeling discouraged perhaps a little bit, and maybe frustrated about the lack of enlightenment that I was supposed to get, I made a deeper connection with Meher Baba then, and I realized that indeed maybe what I had been feeling for some time now in terms of the reading and the engagement with a few people about Meher Baba, there was something more significant about him that I should pay attention to. And I think it touched my heart that he was there with me at that moment, giving me a sign. And it allowed me to do something internally, which was to clearly make a decision that I would speak to him and make a deeper relationship happen. It's hard to explain in words what that really meant, but I do know I said to him, if you will help me, keep me from doing something silly, like taking my life or something in despair, then I will, for the rest of my life, try to help others who may also be suffering in ways. And that became a very profound agreement for me with him that resulted in many things through my life. It brought me to a place of studying medicine, becoming a naturopathic doctor, continuing to study in psychotherapy and becoming a mental health counselor and a psychotherapist, and providing myself with the tools that I needed to be in a position to professionally work with others to help people. And I always experienced through my life, no matter what was happening, my relationship with him being so loving and so present was always there for me. And so that anybody who crossed my path, I felt, seeking whatever kind of help they were seeking, was being sent by Meher Baba. And that my opportunity was to work to support them in whatever might help them to deal with whatever was going on in their life that was creating them some kind of stress or distress or problems. And I ended up studying in terms of individual and marital and couples counseling, and ran groups for 20 or 30 years, and I loved that. And Bob was always with me. And I tend to be eclectic, so I studied a lot of different things because I don't think everybody's the same or needs the same approach. So to me it became very important to know as many different techniques and tools so that I could help as many people as I could in what worked for them. And that was something I felt like Baba, again, guided me in a way. I was very fortunate to have that opportunity. And I always felt very deeply that some people would be sent to me who would at least tell me nobody else had been able to help them. Nobody able to reach them or understand or deal with their chronic or deep issues. And I would just take that in relationship to my own history and know that Baba could help me. So I figured I just need to be present with them and allow him to work through me as best I could. And being someone who liked to have objective clarity about things, I like to study and research and know what I'm doing, which is interesting because on the other hand, there's a lot of that that's an art. And a lot of it's in a way magical. When I just open up to love flowing, it can flow through the network of the professional piece of the knowledge, but it also flows through, I think, just through Baba's capacity to love no matter what. So that was another blessing from him. I'll go back to my trip down to Myrtle Beach, because now you know where I met Baba and had that experience. I've had many experiences like that with Baba that I would say are, I don't know if I'd call them mystical, but they're certainly not necessarily in the realm of my scientific A plus B equals C. There's magic in there, and to me that's Baba's grace and his magic. The bus that I created took me to Myrtle Beach. So we arrived there, and we weren't able to get in because it wasn't open, so they directed us to someplace on the beach we could park. And we parked there, and the two people I was with went for a walking on the beach. And I stayed in the van. And I was just aware I was nervous, I was anxious. I was going to a spiritual center once again, and part of me just didn't feel worthy, or that I was someone who deserved to receive something of a loving embrace from someone who was so much better than me. It's like, okay, well, what am I doing here? How did I get here? And I can laugh about it now, but I was still very frightened about entering in here, that I would be seen for a fraud, or I wasn't really spiritual, and those things really kind of haunted me. While I was sitting there on the beach in my blue van that I had put this camper thing with a bed in it, I had a profound experience that's difficult to describe in some respects, because people say, well, were you asleep? Was it a dream? Was it an altered? It was none of those things really. It was something that happened in another dimension, I think, but nevertheless it felt like it was just very tangible, if that makes sense. In this experience, I saw myself walking up to the gate at the center and getting about 15 feet away and stopping dead in my tracks, because again, it was like, I can't go there. I just thought to myself, I don't deserve it. I'm not good enough. It'll be embarrassing. It'll be awful. I'm not going in there. So I was sort of stuck. I was stuck in that place of my own negative thoughts, my own negative feelings, my self-doubts. So it was kind of a traumatic position for me to be in that moment. And in that moment, as I looked up, I saw someone coming towards me. And I looked, and it was someone with long hair and a white gown on. He was kind of walking, but he was kind of floating. He was tangible, but a little ethereal, I could say. Anyway, it was very distinct to me that he came across the center line. I mean, there was a line for me right there. I wasn't going across. He came across and came towards me, and I was transfixed. Luckily, otherwise I probably would have run away. I was like, and I think psychologically, emotionally, I probably did try to run away. And that's, I think, what led to the set of experiences that was created, or that transpired for me. Baba came very close to me. I think I realized it was Baba. Certainly, I had seen his picture enough. I had never seen a film of him, so I'd never seen him moving. But he was moving. And it was when he crossed the boundary that something alerted me that something's different here. I couldn't go across, but he came to me. And to me, that was a very unique feeling, like he's coming to me, even if I'm not able to go to him. Just like I guess he came to me in Boston when he burnt my frickin' altar down and left his picture there. He came to me. It's like, all right, so I'm not sure how I deserved that, but nevertheless, I was aware he crossed the boundary and came very close to me and stood in front of me and just looked at me. And held my gaze, and what happened is that I couldn't help but sort of reveal all the thoughts I had about why what he was doing wasn't something I could grasp. Basically, I knew he was standing there trying to love me. And telling me that, not in words, but he was telling me that indeed he did love me and accepted me. And so I said, okay, yeah, that's fine, but if you knew this about me, you wouldn't. And so he said, yeah, I will. And I said, yeah, that's fine, that's easy, but what about this? So I began to show him all the things that I carried inside of myself that had convinced me that somehow I wasn't worthy, I wasn't lovable. Just a lot of, I think, I know many of us carry deep, dark places of doubt and insecurity and fear. A lot of that I could track back, of course, to an alcoholic family and to all this and all that, but at some point, having gone through all of what I could see as the psychological reasons I shouldn't be there, I think I went deeper and said, okay, fine, you want to really know why I shouldn't be here? I dug a little deeper, and I think I was probably going into some karmic realities of I don't understand, but I brought them up as well. Thinking, for sure, I'm going to get rid of this guy because he's going to recognize I don't belong here. And he'll say, okay, fine, you win. You don't belong here. You're not lovable. And I believed that. It wasn't like, I really believed that. I thought if I showed him enough, like anybody else who saw me, they would have to sort of say, forget it. That was my negative mind thinking that. What he showed me back was some kind of a love that I had never felt before, or hadn't let myself ever feel before. And I couldn't run from anymore. And I didn't know what to do with. But I had nothing left at that moment to show him to prove that I was right. And he continually was overpowering my negativity with basically his love. At that point, I don't know what was happening within me, but at that point he picked me up. Okay, he picked me up in his arms, like a feather, like a bird, like something very light, and he threw me up in the air, pretty high, and I came down in his arms. And each time he'd look at me with this kind of twinkle, he'd throw me up again, and I'd come down. Each time I came down, I was a little younger. And I don't know how many times that happened. I can make up a number like 7, I don't know. But each time I came down, I was younger. Really, I was going from being an adult. Until the last time I came down, I was an infant. And he was looking at me as a loving parent might. And at that point, I think I kind of surrendered to that, except for one thing. As someone who studies psychology, I know how we project things from our own history into someone else that we then imagine is repeating that history. And I think that psychological, I could certainly understand that the question I asked him had to do with something about, okay, yeah, you can love me, but what about everybody else? I mean, why should I get this and not them? I don't know if that was a piece of sibling jealousy or whatever. Why me? I don't want to be, because that puts me apart from everybody, and now I'm lost again. I couldn't quite grasp that. I don't know where that came from, but it obviously came from some part of me that was carrying that concern. And his response to that was to sort of hold me up on his shoulder and to turn to his right and gaze out. And I could see him gazing out. I could feel him gazing out. And as he gazed out, I realized what he was showing me was what he saw in this world and other worlds. And what he saw was all of creation and everything in creation, every person in creation, every animal in creation, all of creation. And what he was showing me, that he had that love for everything, that I didn't need to worry about it. He had that covered. It's like, he didn't say anything. He just allowed me to, I think, be inside of his consciousness for a moment and experience that, so that I had no doubt that it was true. And that was it. I had no more questions. I was like, okay. And instinctively, I knew, not from anything I had read, but I knew that what I had just experienced was love, but it wasn't a human love. It was a combination of a personal human love and a divine love. And I was feeling it was okay to have a personal love from somebody who also loved everybody else, but he was personal with me. That seemed impossible to me. I couldn't grasp it, but I couldn't deny it because he was showing it was true. So that was, for me, a glimpse into what I think Baba says we sometimes get from the masters, is a little glimpse of something more, something beyond our limited consciousness that will help us in our journey. He says, masters don't give that out very often, only when they have to. Because we get spoiled or whatever, I don't know. I didn't get another one like that. That was it. But it was so powerful that it did what Baba said it would do. It sealed itself in my consciousness, like writing on stone. So it's always been there. Even if I'm somewhat distant or separate from it, it's always there. And I could always go back to it. And anytime I'm dealing with that inside myself or with other people who are really suffering, I go back to that. Divine love is not just human love. It's something much more profound. And so that's a gift of grace from him. So that's what I experienced when I first went to the center in Myrtle Beach. And I continued to struggle because I was always under the impression that on a spiritual path, a disciple needed a living master. As it was said at the time, only a living master is going to kick your ass and really know how to work with you in the moment. So I continued to work with other teachers in different disciplines for some time, as Baba sort of reeled me in and gave me some slack and reeled me in. And, years went by and decades went by. And I kept getting closer and closer, realizing that Baba's relationship was alive. He was there with me and guiding me in ways that I maybe didn't always feel or understand, but it was true. Just by reading the discourses or other things by Baba, I was always able to have a very deep connection to him, and profoundly moved by reading over and over and over again his words and watching his films and getting to know more people. So that transformed itself eventually into my becoming just solely focused on Meher Baba. There came a time when I was going to the LA Sahavas with my wife, and she wasn't a Baba lover at the time, she is now. But nevertheless, she sort of slyly pressured me to go to India. She wanted me to go. She thought I should. I thought, I don't need to go. I've met Baba in Myrtle Beach. What more could I ask for? But, Bao said, go to India at least once and go to the tomb and get a gift waiting for you. And I said, I had my gift. Well, I'm not want to be greedy here. So nevertheless, Debbie talked to some people and finagled this thing where she was going to get me to go to India with Steve Barry and Virginia Small, I think. Yeah. So I was going to India, and I was going because I think what Steve Barry said, somebody's going to take her back. She's quite elderly and she needs help. So why don't you go and take her and help her back? And I went, all right. So I took my two boys. My youngest son turned 7, so he was old enough to go. So I said, I'll take my 2 boys and I'll go to India. Okay. So I was supposed to be taking her back, but the reality was she was taking me back because she had lived there for the longest time. Turns out in some kind of way, I think she'd lived there as long as I had known Baba and not gone to India. So I was like going with somebody who had been there ever since I first knew of Baba, and she was taking me back and introducing me to people she knew for 30 years as if I was her best friend. And so paving this way for me to be in India and get connected to people. One thing that I want to share.
What year was it that you went to India?
I think that was in 2000 or so. So when I got to India with my boys, it was a moment when you get on a bus and you go from Mehrabad to Mehrzad. And we went and had a chance to meet some of the Mandali, Erich and others. Katie, I think, was there, and Bal Natu was there. Bal Natu was very sweet, and he said immediately upon seeing me, he said he felt a very deep connection with me, like we were very similar in terms of our soul's energies. And I felt that too. It was a very sweet connection he made with me. And when I got to Mehrzad, I walked up and I saw the blue bus there. And immediately I was like, the blue bus. And it hit me. I had gone to Myrtle Beach and experienced Baba in the blue bus he had given me earlier. It was like, oh wow. It was like, how crazy is that? How sweet is that? That he provided me with his chariot, his blue bus, to take me to the beach where his presence is so strong, and to meet me in the blue bus. It was like, and this is, we're talking 20 years later, that it just dawned on me that that's what had happened. And that was, uh, it was cute. It was like really sweet. Thanks, Baba. Thanks for giving me the bus. Thanks for all that. So I just found that to be a very exquisitely Baba kind of a thing, where time doesn't really matter. Here's 20 years that something happened that I didn't even realize. And a number of things happened like that, that just confirmed, like, no matter how much doubt I may have, little things like that he does that just indicate to me he's present, he's caring, and he's capable of operating in many different ways, way beyond my capacity to comprehend. So now I'm retired. Initially, when I was going to retire, my intention was to come back to the center because it was so precious to me and do whatever I could to support the center. Unfortunately, my wife has an illness that didn't allow her to be safe and comfortable here, so we had to find a place close by. And that's why we ended up in Asheville, North Carolina, living with a large group of Baba people who have been very, very loving and available for friendships and groups and sharing. And that's worked out really well. So initially I thought I was close enough to Asheville I could come to the center and work here, but because of my wife's condition, I really couldn't leave Asheville very much. So I found out of interest what I could do there, and it's turned out that we have started an organization that's dedicated towards providing archival preservation and sharing of Baba's works, and also we've recently purchased a large building that's being converted into an archival center for this process, and also for hopefully a place maybe for the community to be able to have a place to come as Asheville community grows, as it is growing. And I was able to take on the position of being the project manager for this building, which is a great privilege. And I work with others who are volunteering as well to refurbish this beautiful old building. So Baba's given me now a chance to really serve him in a way that I think is very incredible. I see this space potentially as a beautiful space that Baba will create for service, for coming to him, for people learning about him. As times get more difficult, I see it as kind of an ark, as a place that's safe, and hopefully will serve to preserve not only his words and his pictures and his photographs, but also a place where he can live, as I know he lives here in Myrtle Beach, and for other people to come and meet with him and learn from him and be exposed to him and have opportunities to make those connections. So that's where I'm at right now. Happily centered in a beautiful place that I love in the mountains, and doing work that I find to be very rewarding and enriching and meaningful. So it's all a blessing from him, I think. And we'll see where it goes from here,